Happy Independence Day, everyone. It is July, and that means the 4 new Big 12 members have officially made the jump to their new conference.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I want to thank you so much for joining us, even on a national holiday. My name is Isaac Schade, and I am your host today. Coming up on the show, we are talking about all the movement in the Big 12. We have 4 new members, as you'll probably recall. That's BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. We're going to talk to the hosts of 2 of our Locked On shows that have moved into the Big 12, and that's Parker Ainsworth of Locked On Coogs, Houston, and Jake Hatch, the host of Locked On Cougars from BYU. And then I'll finish up by just talking about a few other things surrounding all this with the Big 12. Let's get right into it. And so we start this Big 12 conversation with the host of Locked On Coogs, Mr. Parker Ainsworth. And Parker, here we go. It's Independence Day, July 4th. And I guess you could say the Cougs have gained their independence from the AAC, but then pledged their allegiance to the Big 12. It's great to see you. I see you. For those not watching, Parker's rocking a Big 12 hat, just leaning right on into it. And I'm here for that. And so, Parker, that's the deal. That's what we're here to talk about. Houston, with the calendar flipping to July, is now officially a member of the Big 12, one of 3 AAC members to make the leap, along with, obviously, UCF and Cincinnati. And then the 4th team is BYU from the WCC. And we'll actually be talking in the next segment with Jake Hatch, the host of Locked On Cougars. So, Parker, obviously this change is across all sports, but this is a basketball show, and that's what we're going to talk about. So my question to you to start things off is, what are the feelings in and around Houston about the Cougars joining Division I's current best basketball conference?
Well, so I think there's a couple things. One, people are excited, right? Houston has built up a strong basketball program, and frankly, I think it's got a fairly underrated basketball history. I know that there was a dark period there between when the Big 12 started and Houston was left out until Kelvin Sampson kind of shows up, where it's what was going on there? And I don't mean to say there was no good players came through anything, but it is a program that has 6 Final Fours to its name, right? Faisal Majama or Elvin Hayes in the 60s. It's got a lot of history to it, and so it kind of feels right. I have to admit, though, having Sampson and then his son Sampson and company in charge really makes everyone feel more comfortable about it, right? Because he's been in the Big 12. He did the thing at Oklahoma and made them a very strong program. And so I think people are confident and excited. We're not as tall as some of these Big 12 teams, but I think people are confident about what's going on.
Yeah, they make up for that with speed. The Cougars do. Parker, well, is there any reason to think that Houston won't just slot right in and essentially keep on winning at the same high level as they did in the American Athletic Conference?
Well, I think that's going to be interesting because when Houston, for all, people are oh, they only got the Sweet 16. What? They went 33-4 last year, right? They did not lose a whole lot of basketball games. And so people are going to be well, they won't go 33-4 in the Big 12. And it's of course they won't, but they'll also theoretically, you could be a better basketball team that goes, for the same count, 28 and what does that make? 9? That's still a really strong basketball team that is at least a Sweet 16 team, right? I'd imagine that they're keeping a couple of the pre-conference home and homes, with the Oregons and stuff like that of the world. I actually don't know when the Alabama one runs out off the top of my head, but the deal is then you get to go play, your conference games become Kansas. And while people say Houston hadn't played that kind of team in conference play in a long time, we've also seen them knock off Power 5 teams in pre-conference play, like Virginia, right? That was a very strong team last year on the road. We've seen them knock off Arizona in the Sweet 16 a couple years ago. They got to the Final Four, right? And they matched up. And they actually played Baylor better than Gonzaga played Baylor for whatever that. I mean, there's no trophy for that, but you get what I mean there, right? They've done well in these kind of situations in the past. I don't think there's any reason to think that moving into the Big 12 that they wouldn't handle them fairly well on a more regular basis either.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we've learned about conferences like the Big 12 is that you can be a better basketball team with a worse overall record. And I think it's taken maybe the general college basketball public a while to catch up on that. Like, on Selection Sunday, there's all the like, why are they seated higher than us? Their record isn't as good. Well, yeah, they're a better basketball team. And so, Parker, I think that's the natural next question is I completely agree with what you're saying there. I think Houston's win percentage probably won't be as high every year. I think there's going to be years where they'll be, probably pretty close to where they were in the AAC. But in what ways do you foresee the higher level of competition, with all due respect to the AAC, the Big 12 just is a higher level of competition. In what ways do you see that higher level of competition benefiting Kelvin Sampson's club?
Well, I almost feel like it helps a lot come March Madness. Because I was making the argument last year when Houston played Miami and they lost in the Sweet 16, a very good Miami team. They hadn't played anyone as good as Miami since December, right? Yeah. And that's not to say Memphis isn't talented, or like, I think Landers Nolly may be about to get a pro shot in summer league, whatever, for Cincinnati, like the talented programs for sure. But playing a team that is road tested like Miami played Virginia twice, and I think maybe again in the conference tournament after Houston did, right? So that's like they played that team fairly regularly. That Houston will do that now with teams like Kansas or Baylor, or we'll see what the Texas Tech program turns into. They've had a little bit of turmoil in the last 18 months, I guess, but they were pretty strong there for a minute, right? TCU's been good. Like there's countless teams, right? And so you don't have that layoff between high-end competition where you play Virginia and Alabama in December and then just kind of play with your food, hope you stay healthy, and like Marcus Astor didn't until you get to March, right? Like that's I think the benefit is kind of the frequent tune-ups. It also is very real look in the mirror kind of moments. Like you cover all of college basketball, so you see, you can do really well in the non-conference, then get your conference playing like, whoa, wait a second.
We're not who we thought we were.
Exactly.
That was fool's gold. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's where I'm at on is that, like, on the whole, I think it'll be a good thing, even if they lose a handful of games in the course of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think the other Power 6 conference teams have come to know and just be okay with, is that we're going to take some lumps, but in the long run, we will be more road and battle tested and ready to go. Parker, with this jump to the Big 12, I want to kind of switch from competition to getting the guys who will compete. How do you see this affecting, or maybe you already have seen it affecting Houston's ability to recruit?
I think it's interesting because it's hard to tell what's been the Kelvin Sampson effect and what's been the Big 12 effect, right? Because he is a great recruiter, and his son, we'll see because they think they're going to hand the program over to his son one day, right? And so we'll see what kind of a head coach's son is, but his son is a heck of a recruiter too. I pulled up 24/7, does like the top whatever recruits to ever come through the university since they've been calculating them. So like Akeem is not on this, right? But 8 of the top 16 are currently on the roster, right? And so like that is, I think, speaks volumes to, like, yes, they had Daniel House many years ago, but 8 of the top 16 are currently on the roster. And frankly, for what it's worth, Jarris Walker and Tremont Mark are also both in that top 16. So that's been, they would have been on the roster if Jarris had stayed, or he was never going to, right? Or Tremont as well, right? So that's fairly impressive for this University of Houston recruiting class as of late. And then, as a national basketball guy, they're in one of the best recruiting hotbeds for high school basketball talent in America. The state of Texas is great too. I think 6 DFW kids got drafted. I saw last week some people from Dallas are really cheering that on, or whatever that was a couple weeks ago. But Houston itself has, Houston Yates program. The Willow Ridge had the historic one in the early 2000s, but it's also currently got different Fort Bend, Marshall, and stuff like that. Like kids coming out of there, going all over the country to play basketball. If you can keep those kids home, like Terrence Arsenault's from Beaumont United,
right?
That you keep those kids home, you build a program right there on itself.
Oh, man, that's fun. It's going to be so interesting to watch Houston right out of the gate. As you alluded to, lost some talent with Jarris Walker, Tremont Mark, Marcus Sasser getting out, but no reason for me, at least, to think that Houston won't just continue to replenish and compete right up there at the top of the Big 12 as a perennial powerhouse up there with Kansas and, well, Texas for one more year at least before they head out. Now, Parker, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because it's Independence Day. What is one of your favorite Independence Day traditions?
So I think of Independence Day as like barbecues and finding the water. When I was a younger kid, we'd go down to the Rockport, so down the coast some in Texas, the Texas beach. The water is not great on the Texas beaches or anything like that, but it was just kind of like a little long weekend excursion always, and typically have some sort of barbecue or hot dogs or whatever. But I got to ask you, Isaac, what do you put on your hot dog for Independence Day and hot dogs and all of that?
I am a like chili and cheese kind of guy.
Ooh, boy.
Yeah, that's my go-to there. So I don't like mustard. I don't like relish. So I'm either chili and cheese or just ketchup. Pretty simple.
You're not beating what's his name in the hot dog eating contest?
No,
chili and cheese on top
no. In no way. Yeah. So, well, Parker, good stuff, man. Excited for Houston moving to the Big 12, and also want to say a big word of congrats to you, folks. Our man Parker is a new dad, trying to figure out how to catch some sleeps and keep up with us. So, Parker, we're excited for you and your family as you raise that young human.
Thanks, Isaac. It's been an exciting couple weeks here.
Well, coming up next, we move from Locked On Cougs to Locked On Cougars. We're going to talk, as I alluded to earlier, with Jake Hatch, the host of Locked On Cougars. BYU also making the jump to the Big 12. They're going to have to travel a little bit further than Houston to get to their games. We'll talk with him in just a second. But before we do, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Well, we move now from Locked On Cougs to Locked On Cougars. We don't need those shortened nicknames. We are joined by the host of Locked On Cougars, the BYU show, Mr. Jake Hatch. Jake, it's so great to have you on, and it comes at a really interesting time because as the calendar has flipped to July, BYU is now officially, how about officially? That's a real word. A member of the Big 12 now. Obviously, 3 of the 4 new members all come from the American Athletic Conference, Cincinnati and UCF and Houston. But BYU is that lone member coming over from the WCC. What does it mean to be this lone representative? And yes, I am firing shots at my co-host Andy Patton from Locked On Zags when I say that. To be the lone member of the WCC currently joining the Big 12.
Well, first off, let me thank you for having me on. But the thing is, at the risk of making Andy mad, BYU is excited to be part of the Big 12. This is something that BYU has aspired for and they've tried to get to for the last 12 years. They went independent in football and dropped everything else in the WCC because they wanted to get to this level. So I can tell you this much, based on the reaction from Cougar fans this past weekend celebrating their entrance into the Big 12, good times are ahead for BYU.
And that's interesting, Jake, because I've been really curious to ask you, like, what are the feelings there in Provo? What are the fans around the country thinking about this? And it sounds like because it's been such a long time coming, it's been an intentional thing that the athletic department has been, and the university as a whole has been working towards, that it's being received pretty well.
Yeah, well, they had a countdown at midnight here in Utah on Friday night to celebrate turning the clock, turning July 1, and celebrating that. Had a huge party out at their athletics facilities on Saturday afternoon. So they're celebrating in a big way, and Cougar fans have just been dying for this opportunity. They saw their arch rival Utah make the jump to the Power 5 ranks 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I guess should say now, and they have been hoping that they could experience that same type of deal. Now, obviously, it's come all these years later, and I can tell you this much: Cougar fans, they've been partying hard, about as hard as LDS members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will do. But they've been celebrating big time this past weekend.
Jake, did you have a chance to go out to that party?
I did. We actually had a chance as a media corps to sit down with Tom Homo, the BYU athletic director, talk to him a little bit about his feelings because he went through all this. He's been around at BYU since they were in the Mountain West. He helped them transition to independence, and now obviously making the transition to the Big 12. So he's got a lot of perspective on it. I had a great chat with him, and then was out wandering around. It was actually one of the hottest days of the year, funny enough, here along the Wasatch Front in Utah. So good times were had, though. There were BYU fans all over the place. They were having a great time, just reveling really in this momentous occasion, because it doesn't come around every day that you get to make the jump to a Power 5 conference. So BYU fans made sure to take a full advantage of that opportunity.
I love it. Now, Jake, you talked about, I hadn't really processed this much, but with Utah going to the Pac-12, were there people that would have preferred to make that switch so that the two rivals could be back together? Or is it like, rivalry be darned, we'd rather be part of the Big 12 as a more kind of, at this point, at least in basketball, which is the point of our show, a more prestigious conference right now?
I think if you were to go back a ways, like in the history, if you go back like 5 or 6 years, they're probably some portion of the BYU fan base that would have said, the Pac-12 is still our favored conference to go to. But I think as things kind of transpired, how they were doing, looking at the Big 12 in terms of their rumors of them expanding, BYU did go down to Dallas in 2016 and made a big pitch to the Big 12 then. They ultimately decided, after they said they were going to look at expansion, not to expand. But I think after that, BYU and their fan base's sights were fully set on the Big 12, because it felt like, okay, if they're receptive to even having us down there to pitch them on the opportunity to join this conference, let's go all in with these guys. Now, I think if you go back even further than that, there have been rumors going back to the 1990s of BYU and expansion of both Big 12 and Pac-12. So I think if it would have come to it, if they would have had the opportunity to jump to the Pac-12, and that was the only opportunity, BYU fans would have accepted it. But I think very much that the fact that the Big 12 has embraced what BYU is all about, and they now have that opportunity to be part of a Power 5 conference, I think they're all in with the Big 12.
And Jake, part of it that is just part of the landscape of college athletics now is the loss of geographic ties, where it's just not nearly as much a thing. I did some Google mapping earlier today just to start wrapping my head around what kind of travel a team like BYU would have to do. So I looked up from the Marriott Center to the WVU Coliseum in Morgantown, West Virginia, 1,913 miles. From the Marriott Center, this is the wild one to me, to Addition Financial Arena down in Orlando, Florida, where UCF plays their basketball, 2,304 miles. Jake, I know there are a whole lot of positives, but specific to the travel side of it, what kind of effect is this going to have on the university?
Well, they're obviously going to have to invest more heavily in charter flights and the like, obviously, to help these athletes ferry them back and forth. And you're right, there's going to be pretty extensive travel with how far-flung this conference is, because BYU's on the far western edge of this conference and in many ways geographically isolated, similar to what West Virginia was before Cincinnati joined the conference. So, BYU's going to be flying a lot. The nice part is there are BYU fans literally in every corner of this country. Anybody who's seen a BYU game when they've been out on the road has seen BYU fans. They show up to everything. So it doesn't matter where they play, West Virginia, Cincinnati, they go to UCF. BYU fans love Disney World. I can tell you that much. The trip to Orlando will be much relished amongst BYU fans, just with the chance to be able to go to Disney World and Universal Studios and the like. But there is a component of this travel side of things that I've thought about. I think Tom Holmoe, BYU's athletic brain trust, has thought about this. They know that there's extensive travel required in this conference, and they are going to invest in that. I would assume that you'll see more of the various athletics programs at BYU take more charter flights when feasible, just to keep athletes from having to spend extra time on the road and getting them back into class and the type of stuff. Because, as you mentioned, 2,300 miles between UCF and BYU. That's not very easy to do, but that's kind of the new reality for them. So I would assume you'll see some of those when they make those trips to Orlando. Yeah, I could see, let's say, the women's basketball team or something chartering a flight like that, where they fly straight there, get the game in, and maybe go to wherever they probably play a back-to-back somewhere. They maybe go to West Virginia, who knows, fly to West Virginia and then fly right back home, just to minimize the impact of missing school and obviously on the athletes' bodies themselves.
And I'm sure there are some other negatives, but I don't want to dwell on that. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So Jake, I want to ask you personally, and like, I don't mean Jake, the host, the radio host, the podcast host, like Jake, the human being. What are you most excited about for this switch to the Big 12?
Well, I'd say I'm a football guy, but the thing about this is it gives an opportunity for BYU basketball to take the next step, because you already kind of alluded to it. This is the best basketball conference in the country, speaking of the Big 12. Top to bottom, they've got the best programs. And at the top end, you're going to go up against Final Four contenders on an annual basis, if not one, maybe two or three of them. So that's going to obviously make it very tough for BYU to compete, it feels like, early on in the Big 12. But Mark Pope and the rest of the BYU basketball programs, Amber Whiting on the women's side, they have said that, hey, you know what? We're ready to take on this challenge. Now, will they ultimately succeed? Will they finish in the top half of the conference early on? I highly doubt that. That's just, I think, the reality of the situation that they're going up against. But the thing about it is, it's just a huge opportunity for them to find and play against some of the best athletes out there. And like I said, it's not going to be, I think, pretty early on. The one thing I can tell you, though, I am super excited. We saw Fran Fraschilla allude to it this past weekend about a potential big Monday matchup with Kansas coming to the Marriott Center in Provo to play a big Monday game in the Big 12. That type of stuff, that's what I'm most excited for. Having Kansas come through, having Houston come through. You can go on down the list of these basketball programs. The opportunity as a media member to go cover those games and to watch these teams come to Provo, that alone, even if BYU may be getting their head kicked in at some points, the fact that Kansas may be in Provo, that's very exciting to me.
I cannot wait for that. And folks, if you've never watched a game, if you're an East Coaster and you don't stay up late, man, you have missed out watching these games. And I cannot wait to see Big 12 action taking place there in Provo, Utah. Jake, I'm hearing fireworks go off behind me in the night. It is Independence Day. I just would love a parting shot from you about what July 4th thing, tradition, whatever it may be, you most look forward to.
Favorite thing for me for 4th of July is getting together with my family. Now, I've got two families now because I am married. So I've got my in-laws and my regular family. But the nice part is they all live pretty close to one another. They're about 30 minutes separating both families. So just get to spend time. Pull out the grills, make food, light off the fireworks. My kids love being outside and having a good time out there, running around like wild children as they're wont to do. But that's my favorite thing about Independence Day is the opportunity just to kind of sit back, hang out with family, watch some fireworks, pull out the grill and make whatever you want. I think my father-in-law said he wants to try and do a brisket. I'm excited for that. So
can I come? I'll fly.
Yeah, you come on over, man. I'm sure there'll be plenty. Like we'll be happy to host you here in Provo. But that's the thing about Independence Day and 4th of July is just I like the familial aspect of it. Just being able to kick back and have some fun, and it's just that's the best part about it is the community aspect. Like I should say, even more than just the family aspect. People come together, just have a great time. And obviously we're celebrating the independence of our great nation here. We're coming up on 250 years of the United States of America being around. It's crazy to think we're 3 years away from that, but at the same time, it's a really, really fun time.
I love that. Thank you for that good word and great reminder to us all about the importance of our loved ones and community, Jake. A great way to wrap up our time together. Folks, make sure you go listen to Locked On Cougars. Give Jake a follow on Twitter at Jacob C. Hatch. Great stuff as always. Jake, thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the holiday.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Isaac.
So what does the Big 12 look like right now and in the immediate future? Plus, what's the shape of this new media deal? We'll talk about that. Plus, since it's Independence Day, I want to give you my 5 favorite Independence Day traditions. All that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, it is time to relearn the conferences. This happens every couple of years now because of realignment, where you've memorized, okay, all these teams are in this conference, and you got to work your way back through it because it's like, okay, now who just moved over there? Yep, okay, got that right. In fact, here's what a crazy weird guy I am. On the drive my wife and I had to our honeymoon, we're driving to the airport. I made her memorize the schools in the Power 5 conferences. And now it's kind of a joke in our family. But seriously, I think it's such a fun game to just work on memorizing them. If I'm having trouble falling asleep at night, I'll just rattle off the national champions or, all right, Big 12, and just work my way through it or something like that. So this is one of my favorite games. And I just want to make sure you understand what the scope is of who all is currently and soon in or out of the Big 12, because it's going to change multiple times over the next couple academic years. So for the 2023-24 year, the Big 12 is going to have 14 teams in it. The teams that we've just been talking about today that have just been added, the 4 teams, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. And then you add to them the 10 existing Big 12 members. Man, these numbers are wacky, right? So Kansas State, Oklahoma State, the 4 schools in Texas Tech, Baylor, and TCU, and then Iowa State and West Virginia. So that gives you 14 for this upcoming sports year, academic year, college year, whatever you want to call it. And then when we get to this time next summer, so as of July 1st, 2024, we will lose 2 of those members, Texas and Oklahoma. That's when they take off for the SEC. I don't know if you remember, that was updated. And so as of this time next year, the Big 12 will actually have 12 teams in it, barring anything else wild and crazy that happens between now and then. You never know with the landscape of sports in college right now. But that's kind of the update for you. Just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of that. Now, one of the things that's part of all of the conference realignment and stuff is always media deals and who's covering and all that stuff. And for example, remember the Big Ten doesn't have ESPN in their coverage package anymore. And so we always need to stay updated on what's going on there. So to that end, I want to stick with the Big 12 because over the weekend, Pete Thamel reported via sources that the Big 12, quote, has signed and executed its long-form television contracts with Fox and ESPN for the TV deal slated to begin in July of 2025. So that's 2 years from now on July 1st of 2025. And that deal is going to run through the 2030-31 school year. So 25-26, 26-27, 27-28, 28-29, 29-30, 30-31. So that's a 6-year media deal that the Big 12 will have with Fox and ESPN. So 2 more years on the current deal, and then they'll move to this new one. So what does all that mean? Great question. Let me give you just another quote that Thamel followed that up with. He says, quote, "This is the formalization and completion of the deal announced in October of 2022, the process of which began when the Big 12 opened its negotiation window nearly a year early. The Big 12's attention now moves to finalizing a data deal like streaming stuff, which is expected in the upcoming weeks." And so here's the takeaway for me for this is, in all this realignment upheaval, there's, all right, Big 10's going to survive, SEC's going to survive, but what about Big 12, ACC, and Pac-12? What this tells me is that the Big 12, boil it down, is on better footing than a lot of people thought, and I think they're going to be just fine, thank you very much. They've added these other programs in. I know they're losing Texas and Oklahoma, which are 2 of the biggest brands in all of collegiate sports, and that hurts. It does. There's no sugarcoating that. But I think ultimately and overall, the Big 12 is going to be in a good spot. Now, It truly is hard to know with the continually shifting landscape of college athletics and conference allegiances and all that stuff. But as of where we're at today, I really feel good for the Big 12. Now, what's interesting about Thamel's reporting on this is those tweets were coming out the same day on Friday of last week that ESPN was announcing a whole nother round of layoffs. And man, it's tough. This is a cutthroat industry. And ultimately, yes, people try to care about one another, but the almighty dollar is the bottom line. One other piece of conference realignment news I should say while we're sitting on this is, if you missed it, San Diego State, we talked about it on the show, I believe it was last week or the week before, all these planned moves to the Pac-12. At least right now, that ain't happening. San Diego State is planning to deliver a notice to the Mountain West Conference that it is going to stay in the conference. This is a weird turn of events, one I did not expect to see coming, because, I mean, this has been a thing, a rumor, a conversation for a long time now. Weird turn of events for San Diego State, and we'll have to keep our eyes on what that ultimately means. Now, I promised you I wanted to give you my favorite 5 Independence Day traditions. So let me roll through those. Number 5, it's like a combination. I love going to a baseball game on July 4th, but then watching the fireworks display after. I think that's just such a fun, because I don't know whether it's like Sandlot getting into my head of playing baseball and watching fireworks together. I just think that's such a fun thing. Number 4, eating watermelon. I don't know why, of all the foods, this is the one that stands out so much to me, but there's just something about a July 4th cookout and having watermelon and spitting seeds. Maybe it's a nostalgia thing for me, but anyway, that is what it is. Number 3, moving from watermelon, the fruit of the meal, to the dessert of the meal, homemade ice cream. I love ice cream. Like, I am that is a weak spot for me, but specifically there's something I just remember about either my family or some other families churning homemade ice cream on July 4th and then getting to eat that, right? Back in the days when you actually had to crank the bucket with the rock salt and all that. And man, my mouth is watering just thinking about it. Number 2, Independence Day traditions. I grew up in a family where we watched a lot of tennis, and particularly Wimbledon. I was born in England, and so Wimbledon's a big thing for our family. And so Wimbledon started on Monday. And so there's just something about kind of the beginning of Wimbledon going on July 4th, even funnier because it's in England, right? And so there you go. And then my favorite tradition on July 4th is watching the movie Independence Day. It came out when I was, I guess it was like the mid 90s, maybe 94. And so I was about 9, 10, 11 years old when it came out. And so it's just like kind of a foundational movie for me, and Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum and the president's speech, the whole thing, man. I absolutely love it. By the way, my least favorite Independence Day tradition, where I live in Missouri, there are no fireworks like restrictions. And so all night long, and not just on July 4th, but in the days leading up to and after it, all throughout my neighborhood, people are blowing up fireworks, waking my kids up. It's a whole thing, and I don't love it. I will go to a professional fireworks thing any day of the week, but don't give me that stuff right outside my window. It drives me crazy. Anyway, there you go. Isaac Shade's 5 favorite Independence Day traditions. I'd love to know yours too. Why don't you share them with me if you're watching on YouTube? Speaking of which, that's it for today's episode of Locked On College Basketball. If you would, subscribe to the show on YouTube, smash the like button so we know you were here, and leave comments on your favorite traditions or any of this Big 12 realignment stuff. As always, my apologies to the lawyer family. Go Wildcats. We should, I forgot to call the Houston Wildcats and BYU Wildcats. Bummer. Anyway, go Wildcats, and until next time, peace.